Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's Mid-City Sermon Cast. This week, we're continuing our Does Jesus Still Matter series, and we're going to talk about heaven. So let's dive in. So we're continuing our Does Jesus Still Matter series. And in this series, we've kind of been looking at the life and ministries of Jesus and asking the question, does this stuff still matter to our lives and to the world today? And this week, I really want us to dig into the idea of what's coming in the future, or we often think about it in these terms of what's heaven going to be like. So what we believe about the future has a really powerful effect on how we experience today. So back before Christmas, my son Ethan came to me and told me that what he wanted for Christmas was for me to take him to see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play the New Orleans Saints. And he brought me the tickets on a computer and said, "Hey, Dad, this is what I want." I said, "This is what you want for Christmas?" And he said, "Yeah." So, but then as I looked closely, I realized that the game was being played in Tampa Bay. So this is what he wanted. So that was his Christmas gift. And so he and I did a father and son trip to Tampa Bay. But probably for about 2 months before the game, I knew that we were going to take this trip together. I'd bought him the tickets. I was kind of excited about giving him the tickets for a gift, and mapped out like the route we were going to go on and the music we were going to listen to. And just knowing that we were going to take that trip, just kind of, put a little spring in my step for the weeks and month leading up to it. Now, I do got to say this. We went to the Buccaneers Stadium, and one of the things I realized really quick is their chants are terrible. So when something happens, like they get a first down or something big happens that they want to celebrate, the announcer goes, "Tampa," and the crowd goes, "Bay." And I really was thinking to myself, they need to work on that. I mean, that's a pretty weak chant. But anyway, point being, what I was preparing for in the future had a profound effect on what I was experiencing in my day-to-day life, right? Knowing we were going to go on this fun trip kind of lifted my heart and put a little spring in my step. So can you think of a time when you knew that something good was coming and the anticipation changed your mood or your perspective? So as we read through the New Testament, one of the things we see is that Jesus and then Paul and then others, despite the suffering and the setbacks of their lives, they had a great hope for the future. One of the things I've talked about before is we see that every time that Jesus talked about his coming suffering and his crucifixion, he always followed it up by saying, "But 3 days later, I'm going to rise again." Before his death in John 14, Jesus told his disciples that he was going to his Father's house that had many rooms, and that he would come back to them and that he would take them to where he was going. Like Jesus had this positive vision of what the future was like. It was like a Father's house with many mansions, some translations say. Paul, when he talked about the suffering of this current life, said that he considered the suffering of this present time not worth comparing to the glory that was going to be revealed. And we see this over and over again in the scriptures, that despite the sufferings and setbacks, that they had a really positive view of the future. So how about you? What do you believe about the future? And I'm not just talking about like next week or next year or even the next 10 years. I'm talking about eternity. What do you believe about all of this that we're living and that we're experiencing, and where do you believe it's going? So the very last book in the Bible is the book of Revelation, and it's a book that, among other things, talks about the destiny of creation and humanity. It answers the question, where is all this going? So I want to read a little bit to you from Revelation 21, And I'm just going to read verses 1 through 5. So it says this: Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, See, the home of God is among mortals. God will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, See, I am making all things new. So, again, the book of Revelation talks to us about the destiny of the creation and the destiny of humanity. Now, the book does contain some imagery of a day of judgment that's coming, which can be a little bit frightening. And I think a lot of people, when they read the book of Revelation, they think, well, this is scary stuff. One of the things I will remind you of when you think about the day of judgment is the one who will be doing the judging is a God who loves us, a God who knows us. In the Christian understanding, a God who sent his son, who came himself to offer himself for us as an act of love. And so I just want to say that to say we can trust the judge in these judgment stories. But ultimately, the book ends in the most hopeful fashion. It ends with a new heaven and a new earth and a redeemed humanity. So a lot of people say the book of Revelation is one of the most mysterious and difficult books to understand in all the Bible. And I think if you get lost in the details of the book, it can be a little frightening. But the truth is that the book is meant to give us hope. It was actually written for an early Christian community that was being persecuted in Rome, and it was intended to give them hope in the face of the difficulties and the struggles that they faced. So I always encourage you when reading the book of Revelation, actually when reading the Bible in general, don't get lost in the details. Like, keep your eyes and keep your heart on the big picture. So what is the big picture of the book of Revelation? There's a lot of different ways of kind of getting at it. Probably some of the easiest ways to get at it for me are if you think about if you're a Star Wars fan or maybe a Lord of the Rings fan, that there's a battle of good versus evil happening in this story. And like any good story, there are some epic battles that take place. There's a lot of fighting that goes on. There's things that blow up. There's fire. There's smoke. And sometimes all of that can be a little scary. But when the fighting is over in those movies, you can't help but cheer, right? Why not? Because in the end, the good guys win. And I would say to you that's one of the most simple ways that I can talk about the book of Revelation. Yeah, there's some scary imagery and there's some battles that take place, but in the end, the good guys win. Now, if you're not a fantasy or a sci-fi fan, maybe you can think of some other movie where the hero wins in the end. Maybe something like Rocky or Remember the Titans. But that's the idea of the story. What comes after the victory in Revelation can only be described as amazing. So John describes a bejeweled city with pearl gates and streets of gold. Randy Alcorn, who wrote a great book called Heaven, says that the best of life on earth is a glimpse of heaven. And so that's why when John is describing heaven and he says there's streets of gold, right? He's kind of trying to think of what are the best things of the earth. And some people might think of gold as being a cool thing, And he says, look, but heaven is such an amazing place that even the streets in heaven are just paved with gold, right? I heard a preacher one time talk about heaven and described it by what wouldn't be there. And John in the book of Revelation does that a little bit. So he tells us there'll be no more death. There'll be no more mourning. There'll be no more tears. This preacher went on to say there'll be no hospitals in heaven. There'll be no prisons. There'll be no tanks or missiles. There'll be no more food pantries. I mean, think of all the things that won't be there anymore. And one of the things that I often kind of wonder when we're talking about things like this is, can you still dream? Can you still imagine what heaven will be like? Uh, or have we become sort of so earthbound or so cynical that we can't even dream that dream anymore? Now, I know there are some people who are skeptical of this whole notion of a time coming when all evil and darkness and death will be destroyed, and it seems pretty fantastic. Someone once told me, and I thought it was a really interesting idea, and I found it to be true, that someone who's a cynic is an idealist who has really been let down by the world. So whenever I run into somebody who's really skeptical or really cynical, I always kind of look past that a little bit, and I think inside there is an idealist, right, who really does have big hopes and big dreams for the world, but the world has let them down. So here's the thing for me: if you're a skeptic, if you're a cynic, is there a part of you that can still think and dream of a better world? Have you still got that in you? I actually have come to believe that the part of us that dreams that dream is a little seed of heaven that's planted inside of us. It's the part of us that kind of longs for a better world, that longs for things to be better than they are right now. So I started by saying that what we believe about the future has a powerful effect on how we experience today. And again, for me, if we have this idea that what's coming is that good is going to win, and that what's coming is going to be beautiful, and what's coming is going to be the fulfillment of our greatest hopes and dreams, that affects how we live today. And there's two things I want to talk about that it affects. First of all, believing in God's final triumph and the triumph of good gives us hope for today. There's a technical term for this. It's known as eschatological hope. So eschatology is the study of the end of things. And so when we have this belief that in the end God wins and good reigns, we have this hope in that future. The truth is, this life can be very difficult. And some of you right now, I bet, that are listening to me are experiencing pain, heartache, mourning, even loss. So it helps to know that there is a good and loving God. It helps me. It helps to know that this life is not all that there is. It helps to know that the suffering and difficulties that we experience in this life are temporary. It helps me to know that good and light and love will win. So one of the best sort of illustrations I heard about this years ago, it always sticks in my heart and mind, is about a DVR. You remember those things where you can record TV? Do people still do that anymore? I guess with streaming, you don't need to do that as much anymore. But back in the days when I was a kid, you would actually record shows. And if you can imagine, maybe you're looking forward to watching one of your favorite teams play a big game, right? But you've recorded it ahead of time. So I always, whenever I used to record football games, I would hope to get home and be able to watch the game before I found out what the score was. But a lot of times you'd find out what the score was before you got there, but you still watch the game, right? But your experience of watching the game is completely changed because you know the outcome of the game, right? So let's say that your team won, okay? So you go and you start watching the game. You know at the end of the game your team wins, but in the first quarter, one of your favorite players turns his ankle and he's out for the game. Right now, is it still upsetting that the guy turned his ankle? Yeah, and it hurt and his ankle hurts a little bit, but is it as devastating because you know the end of the game? It's not, right? No, well, they're still going to win. Or let's say maybe in the second half that the referees make a terrible call and it's awful and it costs them a score. Again, are you going to be upset at the referees? Of course you are. It still stinks that happened. But it doesn't upset you the same way, right? Because you know what? You know that at the end of the game, your team won. So this whole understanding, when we understand, when we have faith in what the end is, it changes the way that we experience today. It takes away a little bit of the sting. So that's the first thing that it does for us. The second thing it does is this. It helps us to understand what we're to be doing right now. I kind of say it gives us our marching orders. So we believe that Jesus came from heaven to earth. And we believe that when he did, that he brought some of heaven with him. So I want you to think about this with me. So we believe in heaven that there'll be no sick people, right? So when Jesus came to earth and encountered a sick person, what happened? They got better. We believe in heaven that there's no hungry people. So when Jesus came to earth and encountered hungry people, what happened? He fed them. We believe in heaven there are no unforgiven people. So when Jesus came to earth, he forgave people. I think one of the most fascinating ones to me is in heaven there are no dead people. And so when Jesus came to earth, he not only raised people from the dead, he came back from the dead himself, right? So you get the idea, like Jesus brought heaven with him to earth. And you and I are called to do the same thing. And Jesus literally tells us this in the prayer that we know as the Lord's Prayer. He says that we're supposed to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So over the last couple of weeks, we've had our Love Your Neighbor van go out. And this is something that a ministry that has been dreamed about and thought about for months now and has finally become a reality. But the team that goes out has been sending a report every week, and I got to read their report from this week, and it really touched me. So they talked about at one stop, they met two people, one named Tim and one named Val, and they said, "We provided socks, gloves, hygiene kits, food, water, and coffee." At another stop, they met David, who was living in a garbage compactor, and that broke my heart. But they gave him food, water, socks, and a hygiene kit. At their fourth stop, they said they met Cassie, Caden, and Ron. Caden told them that he had been telling Ron about the van a few minutes before they pulled up, because when they'd gone out the week before, people kind of got to know what was going on a little bit, and he was excited, and he was telling people, "Hey, there's this Love Your Neighbor van that's going to come." Caden's arm was healing, the team reported. The week before, they had found that he had an infected spider bite, and they treated the spider bite, and that his arm was doing a lot better. They said they gave Ron a pair of shoes. He wears an 8.5, and they gave him some socks. And he was so grateful, he said, that he just might be able to move around the dance floor in his new shoes. And again, I just thought, in the midst of the difficulties and the struggles that these people experience, just we're bringing a little bit of heaven and a little bit of joy to what they experience. Henry David Thoreau said this: "There's only one path to heaven, and on earth we call it love." So again, heaven, this idea of heaven gives us hope for today. It also gives us our marching orders, and it kind of lets us know what we're supposed to be doing as Jesus followers. So some Christians say that we shouldn't spend too much time thinking about heaven, that we have work to do here. I've actually come to believe the opposite is true. It's because we dream of heaven that we know what our work here is. Because we dream about heaven, we know what our work is. We know what we're supposed to be doing. So can you think of a place in your life, maybe it's your workplace, maybe it's school, maybe it's with a group of friends, where you could bring a little bit of heaven into that situation? And I guess I would ask you is, what are you waiting for? So does Jesus still matter? Do we still need to dream of the world God's way? I think so. Do we need to still dream about people being compassionate and generous and kind and loving? Do we still need people who not only dream that dream, but who live it into reality? Again, I would say yes. If you answer yes, then I need you to understand this. Jesus is calling you and me to be those people. Yes, people who long for and people who dream of heaven, but also people who live its reality here and now. Catching up next time, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Mid-City Church Sermoncast. If you'd like to find a home sheet, a resource that accompanies the sermoncast that has more questions to explore, the scriptures we use today, and more information, you can visit our website, midcity.church/sermoncast. If you'd like to support Mid-City Church by giving, please text the word GIVE to 225-307-0662. Thank you for your generosity, and we look forward to seeing you next week.